I'm good. Sorry, Lawrence, I missed that.
Okay, you're streaming.
Kim, can you hear me now, Kim?
You're streaming.
Yes, I can, Dr. Houston. So we're good, Lawrence? We're ready to go?
Yep, we're streaming.
Great. I will call the roll. Dr. Blanton?
I'm here, Kim.
Thank you. Dr. Bullock?
Present.
Dr. Dempsey? Dr. Fleming?
Present.
Ms. Janeski? Dr. Graham? Dr. Houston?
Present.
Thank you. Mrs. Jones? Mrs. Jones?
She's posted in the chat that she can barely hear, so I know she's
okay.
online.
She is there. Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Mr. Lockus?
Present.
Dr. Locklear?
Here.
Dr. Marr?
Here.
Dr. Miller?
Present.
Dr. Penfield?
Here.
Mrs. Stover?
Here.
Dr. Weddington?
Here.
Dr. Wood?
Present.
And Mr. Wallace? We have quorum.
Thank you. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the December 10th, 2020 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs and licensure. My name is Patrick Miller, and I am chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE Meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you've had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the December 10th, 2020 meeting?
I make a motion, Connie Locklear.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on November 12th, 2020 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
Wesley Wood, make a motion.
Thanks, Wesley. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Connie.
Thank you, Connie. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from November 12th. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now, Dr. Kevin Bastian, Director of Research for Education Policy Initiative at Carolina, Ms. Lisa Sonricker, the Program Director for Central Carolina Teaching Initiative, Mrs. Maureen Stover, Pepsi member and 2020 North Carolina Teacher of the Year, Dr. Tom Tomberlin, and Dr. Andrew Seiberg will present the NCDPI and State Board updates.
All right, thank you. Good morning. This is Kevin Baston at EPIC. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides from our evaluation of the CCTI program. There you go. All right, so thanks again and good morning. This morning I'm going to share with you all some outcomes from our evaluation of the Central Carolina Teaching Initiative. And our work here in the presentation this morning will really focus on the first 2 years of its existence, the 27-18 and the 2018-19 school years. After my presentation, the director of the program, Lisa Sonricker, will be able to give you some more details and depth about the program and its goals and how it's evolving over time. But I will start with giving a little bit of background on the program, and particularly background on the program as it relates to the years in which we're looking at it for this presentation and the work we've done thus far. So in 2016, the State Board issued an RFP for districts to initiate their own local alternative teacher prep programs and awarded this opportunity to Wake County and the Central Carolina RESA, who went on to create this, what was then called the LATP and is now called the Central Carolina Teaching Initiative. Since the 17-18 school year, CCTI has served as an alternative entry. It's now a residency program, but it started as an alternative entry preparation program for teachers in Central Carolina RESA districts. An important point is, of course, it recruits teachers who are already working in these districts that need to complete their preparation requirements. It's not necessarily recruiting individuals into the teaching profession directly. And then at the bottom, focusing on some of the key aspects or key components of their model, of the CCTI model in its first 2 years of existence. And that was 150 hours of coaching and professional development provided by district-based personnel. So not CCTI personnel, but district-based personnel. 150 hours of coursework, contact hours, that was actually provided by CCTI personnel. And those contact hours typically happened in the evenings, spring and summer institutes. And then lastly, the satisfactory completion of a capstone CCTI created performance assessment, which is now evolving into successful completion of the EdGPA. All right, a little bit more background on the evaluation. Again, we're going to focus on teachers in the program's initial 2 entry cohorts. So that was those entering the program in 2017-18 and 2018-19. The first cohort, the 17-18 cohort, had 81 entrants. The second cohort, entering in 2018-19, had 68 entrants. And these teachers, these alternative entry teachers, are working in middle and high schools in the Central Carolina RESA. When it comes to sort of evaluating the effectiveness of the program, one way in which we'll do that is we're going to compare outcomes for these CCTI teachers versus 2 comparison groups. Early career, traditionally prepared teachers in middle and high school, and other early career alternative entry teachers in middle and high schools. And these groups, we're going to focus in on those early career traditionally prepared and early career alternative entry teachers who are working in the same districts and the same schools as CCTI teachers. Today, and in the work we've done thus far, we've really answered 4 questions. What percentage of participating teachers in those first 2 cohorts have completed the CCTI program? How are CCTI teachers perceiving the quality of their preparation? How effective are these teachers, by which we'll look at EVOS and evaluation ratings? And are these teachers remaining in teaching? In particular, we'll look at whether they return to the same district in the following year and whether they return to the same school in the following year. As a bit of background, and there's a lot here, so I'm going to just direct you to a few sort of key takeaways. The left 2 columns, of course, show characteristics of CCTI teachers in their first 2 cohorts, and the 4 successive columns show characteristics of those comparison groups I mentioned: traditionally prepared teachers from the same districts and schools, and alternative entry teachers from the same districts and schools. Couple key takeaways again. One, not surprisingly, given who typically makes up the demographics of alternative entry teachers, but you'll see there for teachers of color that the CCTI cohorts, are more than 50% teachers of color. This is similar to the alternative entry teachers, and of course, roughly double that of the traditionally prepared teachers in our comparison samples. The CCTI teachers are slightly older in age, sort of in their mid-30s versus late 20s, early 30s for those comparison groups. Given that CCTI is focused on middle and high schools, very few of those teachers hold an elementary education license. More of them do hold an exceptional children or a career technical education license, and they're a little bit less likely to hold sort of a middle or secondary grades content license in ELA or social studies. This slide is showing school characteristics over the 2 years we're looking at, 17-18 and 18-19. So characteristics of the schools that CCTI teachers are working in and those comparison groups. So on average, CCTI teachers are working in schools where approximately 58% of the students are economically disadvantaged, a little over 2/3 are students of color. Performance composites are on average 47, and 45% of these schools did not meet growth in terms of school EVOS. Of course, since we're looking at some of the same districts and schools, then the values for those comparison groups are pretty similar. Although I would note, if you looked at that second column, traditionally prepared teachers in the same districts, those traditionally prepared teachers, not surprisingly, are working in schools with fewer economically disadvantaged students, fewer students of color, and higher performance composites. All right, so our first question, how many are completing the program? Left pie chart shows for the first cohort, the right pie chart shows percentages for the second cohort. And what you'll see is, approximately 75% of these individuals are completing the CCTI program. So in cohort 1, 76.5% have completed the program. And of those, many have already passed, their state required licensure exams. In cohort 2, 72% of the program entrants have already completed all their program requirements. Another 3% are sort of still enrolled and working to successfully complete that capstone CCTI created performance assessment. And then again, roughly, in both cohorts, slightly less than a quarter didn't complete the program. So the next two slides are going to show data on how well CCTI completers felt they were prepared to teach and their opportunities to learn. So many of you all are familiar with the work that EPIC does with Dr. Tomlin and Dr. Seiberg at NCDPI and administering a statewide survey to beginning teachers that really has two main sections to it. The first section, which you sort of see across the top, is a set of items about first-year teachers or early career teachers reflecting how well prepared they thought their program, how well the teacher prep program prepared them to carry out certain key teaching tasks. There's about 25 items there. And we can actually group those into sort of three larger constructs, which you see at the bottom of the bars: items that are about instruction, items that are about creating supportive learning environments, and items that are about teaching diverse learners. And what we find here is when we compare the responses of those who completed the CCTI program versus the responses of traditionally prepared teachers working in the same districts, and other alternative entry teachers who have completed their alternative entry program and are working in the same districts as CCTI teachers, as we see, across many comparisons, that those CCTI respondents felt better prepared than either of those comparison groups. And we see something similar in this second set of data. Here, these are coming from sort of the question stem on the survey. In your preparation program, how much opportunity did you have with the following? And again, we can group those items, there's about 15 of them, into those three constructs. Again, instruction, supportive learning environments, and teaching diverse learners. And here, across all comparisons, the CCTI teachers indicated that they felt that they had more opportunities to learn than either of these other comparison groups. I do think it's really important to note here that these are the perceptions of people who choose to respond to the survey. Roughly A little bit more than half of the eligible CCTI completers from those first two cohorts who we sent the survey to completed the survey. Roughly our response rates for the survey in the spring of each year for sort of all beginning teachers is 40 to 45%. So I say that just noting these are good results, certainly from the program, but there's also certainly the possibility for bias in who's choosing to respond. All right, so our second question was, or our third question rather, was starting to look at the performance of CCTI teachers. And one way, of course, in doing that is looking at evaluation ratings. The columns here, of course, are for the 5 professional teaching standards. The top panel is comparing CCTI teachers versus their peers, either traditionally or alternative entry, in the same districts, working in the same districts. And the bottom panel is comparing CCTI teachers versus their peers, traditionally prepared or alternative entry, who are working in the same schools. One takeaway here is, although there are a few statistically significant differences, they're modest in size, and for the most part, all these groups have very similar evaluation ratings. We do see at the top that CCTI teachers are earning slightly lower evaluation ratings than their traditionally prepared teachers from the same districts on those first 2 standards, leadership and class environment, but conversely are earning slightly higher evaluation ratings than their alternative entry peers working in the same schools on those 3 standards: leadership, content knowledge, and reflecting on practice. All right, so the other, another potential way to look at teacher performance, of course, would be looking at EVOS estimates. And so the top 2 bars here are comparing CCTI teachers versus their traditionally prepared peers, and the bottom bars versus their alternative entry peers. There's no statistically significant differences here. You can see, obviously, that the results for CCTI are slightly negative, but very modest in size versus traditionally prepared peers. Positive and more robust in size versus alternative entry teachers, but again, not significant. And then we come to our results that perhaps might be the most robust at this point, and certainly encouraging for the program, and that is looking at teacher retention. Again, the left set of bars is looking at whether teachers return to the same district in the following year, and the right set, whether they return to the same school. For the first cohort for CCTI, the 17-18 cohort, we can look at these outcomes twice. Do they return in 18-19? Do they return in 19-20? For the second cohort, who entered in 18-19, we're able to look at this once. Did they return in 19-20? But here we see that across many of these comparisons, there's positive retention results for the program. CCTI teachers are more likely to return than other alternative entry teachers. That would be sort of the green and purple bars to the same districts and the same schools in the following year. For instance, I could interpret one of these as saying CCTI teachers are 11.6 percentage points more likely than other alternative entry teachers who are working in the same schools to return to the same district in the following year. That's that purple bar here. They are actually also more likely to return to the same districts and schools. I'm looking at the red bar here, than other traditionally prepared teachers who are also working in the same school. So certainly positive retention results for the program. I'll say it now, I'll say it on the next slide. It's hard to interpret any sort of causality here. Of course, it could be that these results are due to high quality practices of the program, of course, right? And or not mutually exclusive. It could be the same. It could be some of both, right? The people who chose to enter and be part of the program. All right, so it's just sort of a quick review and thinking a little bit more about limitations and next steps. Again, approximately 75% of these teachers completed the program. They're feeling very positive in terms of who we heard from, feeling very positive about their preparation experiences. They're certainly performing comparably to other early career teachers, and they are more likely to return to the same districts and schools. Again, some of those limitations I already mentioned. I think there's certainly a potential for bias in who responds to a survey. We don't know if those positive results, particularly for retention, are again due to preparation quality of the program and or characteristics of those served by the program. But I can say with a longer panel of data, we can start to assess outcomes over more years, and that will sort of help in sort of assessing the program and its impact. I would also say, though, In terms of future evaluation work, as I think many of you all would be aware, there'll be challenges to that with the loss of final exams in the state. CCTI is a program that's focusing on middle and high schools, which means, losing final exams, you lose a lot of EVOS data there. And of course, there'll be no EVOS data from the 1920 school year or evaluation ratings from the 1920 school year. So that's, like a lot of things, will make it more challenging to look at teacher performance for the program. We will also be looking at preparation costs of the program. And as Lisa Sonricker will share with you in a moment, some changes over time in the program. We'll be sort of thinking about those changes as well and what it means for impacts on CCTI participants. So with that, thank you very much. We can do questions now. We can also do questions after Lisa's had an opportunity to present.
Any questions for Dr. Bastian? Okay, Ms. Sonrichter.
Okay, thank you so much. I just would like to bring up.
Let me stop sharing there, Lisa.
Okay, thanks. I apologize. Let me stop sharing that for a second. And I'll have to bring up start my video. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Bastian, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this morning and share just some information about our journey from 2017 to the present. I want to thank Doctors Andrew Seiberg and Tom Tomberlin and Kevin Bastian for just being there for us and answering my questions, which are many, and I really appreciate their support in our work. So as Kevin mentioned, in 2016, the State Board of Education issued an RFP for districts to initiate their own local alternative teacher prep program. And Wake County and the superintendents of the CC-RESA were the sole recipients of that grant and subsequently worked to establish the LATP program, which is now known as the Central Carolina Teaching Initiative. Today, I just want to share a little bit of our story and a few of the struggles and successes and the important lessons that we have learned along the way. So we are a residency program, as you know, and of course, this means that our teachers come to us with absolutely no formal training in education. They come to us with backgrounds as diverse as drafting, engineering, biology, world languages, nursing. They are university professors, they are engineers, and they are from the military. Our teachers range in age from 22 to 60 years old. They have one thing in common. They all believe they want to teach our children, and everything else about them is unique. I am proud to say that we are the first multi-district alternative licensure program established by districts in the state. Prior to coming here, I served in Guilford County in the state's first in-district alternative licensure program, GCS Act. In fact, the team who designed the LATP program visited our office and attended our class sessions to get an understanding of how our program worked. But in 2017, I was very excited to join the CC RISA in leading this innovative program. So we have at CCTI a very unique privilege in that we get to meet with our HR department leaders from across the region about 5 times a year, and with our district superintendents quarterly. Not only have we learned much from them, but just as important, they remind us from time to time that we can do difficult things. And so we listen and we hear their needs and we ask for their advice and we analyze our data and reflect and respond to fine-tune our support and our instruction for our educators. And there are, from our experiences in teaching students to teaching adults, learners who are in learning to become teachers, there are a few things we know. That learning is social and thrives on human connection. We learn from reflecting on our own experiences, that our educators need individualized support, that diversity in perspectives matter, and that we all can benefit from a great coach. At CCTI, there are 3 main program components we believe are critical to preparing resident teachers to be effective, and that is support, good instruction, and diverse perspectives. So I'd like to share a little bit with you about how each of these basics have kind of changed for us over the years. So we know that our teachers need to be supported so that they can support our students, and this support occurs on many levels. I want to commend our districts as we see the great support they're providing, especially at this really difficult time. I have not heard one teacher this semester say to me, I don't know where I'm going, I don't feel supported by my district. They know what they're to do, and they feel very supported by their district and school leadership. At CCTI, we know that one-on-one coaching is an integral part of the wraparound support essential for educator growth and effectiveness. Initially, the LATP program was designed as a 2-year program with a coaching requirement of 150 hours per teacher. And this coaching responsibility was placed on the districts. And the districts stepped up and they assigned coaches to support their beginning teachers. Not only was this coaching model costly to districts, there were communication gaps we found between the district coaches and CCTI. There was inconsistent coaching support because coaching looks different from district to district and from coach to coach. So as we move forward to reduce the cost to districts and provide a more consistent approach, we contracted with a statewide coaching support program in our 3rd year. While we reduced the coaching costs for districts, we still found inconsistent coaching support and a misalignment with some of our program goals. So this year, we built our own coaching program designed to meet the unique needs of our resident teachers. So these dynamic hand-picked coaches provide instructional and mentoring support that is aligned with our CCTI program goals and licensure requirements. Our team consists of coaches and master teachers that we contract with part-time to support our educators. As far as instruction, the strengths of a face-to-face cohort are undeniable. The essential human connection fosters strong relationships among teachers, a sense of belonging, discovery, reflection, and trust. For now, our face-to-face looks like this, looks like Zoom. And even though we have never met our teachers in person, they cannot wait to be together to share the same space with their fellow educators, because the energies of these encounters cannot be duplicated across Zoom. And in year 1, we knew that the cohort model was powerful, and we actually met 100% face-to-face with our teachers. So we had 5 cohorts, and we would drive to Warren County to hold class, or to Halifax, or to Durham, or to Wake, or to Johnston, to meet our teachers where they were. We knew in year one we also needed to improve our support for our exceptional children's teachers. So as time went on, we contracted with an EC professor from a local university, as well as a local district EC expert to develop and lead our EC program. Knowing one size does not fit all, we offer different options to attend class. We hold class on weeknights, and we hold class on Saturday face-to-face sessions. We developed a dedicated EdTPA site, and of course EdTPA is new to us, so we developed the site to support our teachers. We added a winter cohort to meet the hiring patterns of our districts. We increased our one-on-one support, especially this year, to our teachers, because they need all the coaching and all the support they can get. And so we do that via Zoom sessions, phone calls, texts, and workshops. The data that I'm just sharing, the simple data that I'm sharing here, represents public school students and teachers by race. The left trio bars indicate students and teachers of color. The green bar shows the percentage of students of color in North Carolina. The blue bar represents the percent of CCTI teachers of color in our current cohort. And the red indicates the percentage of teachers of color across the state. The trio bars on the right indicates white students and teachers. Again, the green indicates the percentage of white students in North Carolina. The blue indicates the percentage of white teachers in CCTI, and the red represents the percentage of white teachers in North Carolina. Our data tells us we're reaching students in a unique way, in a way we know benefits all learners. In addition, we're committed to equity-focused coaching support for our CCTI coaches to strengthen our equity mindset in all practices, from coaching through to our teachers. And as Kevin shared, our teachers are staying in their schools, and that matters to our students. So trends we're seeing as we look forward, we're examining some trends. We're seeing that our teachers are more successful in the face-to-face class sessions rather than the online. And we're beginning to collect data around that so that we can really pinpoint their successes and their struggles. The sharing of ideas among districts fosters a more global perspective from our teachers and our coaches. So as we look forward, one step at a time, we will continue to support our teachers through personalized interactions. We want to strengthen our recruiting process. We would like EdTPA is new to us, so our goal right now is to reach an EdTPA proficiency level of 60% on first attempt. We will be providing equity-focused coaching support for our coaches, and we want to grow our graduates to teach our cohorts alongside us. Like all educators, we're excited to meet with our teachers face-to-face and share heart-to-heart, and they are also. So we are unique because of the things we do to build supportive relationships and a sense of belonging. Kevin shared that our teachers feel connected and supported, particularly in instruction and preparedness. We offer hybrid coursework. We build district relationships. We foster professional learning networks among our educators, and strongly believe in the cohort models. We provide one-on-one coaching. Because of the connections that we're blessed to have and the great people on our team, together we know we can do difficult things. So thank you for listening to our story. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer anything that you're wondering about.
Any questions?
There was one from Dr. Penfield for Kevin in the chat.
I can speak to that, Kim, a little bit if you want. Dr. Pinfield was asking just about sort of different methods we sort of address, like, for instance, we could at some point in the future use propensity score matching as one approach to sort of look at this, which could be helpful. And my response to him in the chat was simply that, we are actually controlling for a lot of variables in the model, including some fixed effects. So, without getting too much in the weeds, I think we're doing fairly well at sort of being able to isolate, CCTI contribution at this point, but that's definitely something we could consider in the future.
This is Connie. I have a question. I want to thank you for your presentation and also the reference to culturally responsive instruction. How much emphasis is placed on culturally responsive instruction now?
Throughout our kind of transformation of our curriculum, we began at the beginning in year one, kind of doing a lesson on equity and then culturally responsive instruction. And it has morphed to that in every lesson that we give, we're going to address that. And so it is a matter of, it's a norm. We're always talking about that in your instruction. How is this instruction culturally relevant to your students? What do you know about your students? What assets do they bring? What needs do they have? And how are you preparing your lessons for them?
Hi, it's Ann Bullock. I have a question in the chat, but I want to first say that it has not been lost on me in this presentation that you realize how much work it is to prepare teachers. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your hard work. My question is, what is your current TPA pass rate if you're trying to move it to 60%?
Yeah, so, well, it's a great question. So due to the changeover to the virtual learning environment, our last year cohort, we have, they stopped teaching in March. And so that was the first year that that was the first cohort that's required to do the TPA. And so the opportunity to video face-to-face and do all those things that we do as teachers was removed. And so we are in a holding pattern with them. We had one teacher so far submit for the TPA prior to, she videotaped before March, right? She passed her TPA, so I guess I can say our rate right now is 100%. But we are supporting them, and we don't necessarily want our teachers to go through the VLE at TPA. We really want this to be a demonstration, a portfolio based on how we see education and incorporating both. Some online when tools, and then the face-to-face instruction. So they're hanging with us and they're getting their other testing out of the way as we kind of support them to let's kind of wait till we come back face-to-face as teaching is normally.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Other questions? All right, is it Dr. Seiberg that's up next?
Chairman Miller,
Yeah,
if it's appropriate for me to ask a question, I would like to ask one.
have at it.
Thank you. Lisa, I'm curious. This is my third time I've heard this presentation. It's just occurred to me to ask you, what is your capacity rate right now for how many teachers you have enrolled versus how many you could support?
Well, at our current team, of course, and we have a very small staff. We would love to have 80. I think beyond 80 teachers, we would consider growing, which absolutely we would love to do. But right now, about 80 teachers in each cohort.
And you view that as 100% capacity right now with your current staff?
Yes.
Okay. And then just
To give this, and I'll say this, because of the support that we give, you know, it takes a lot of time. So yes, about 80 teachers.
And then just a quick follow-up. My assumption is, and I want to check this assumption, is that your enrollment is driven by the needs of the districts in your consortium. In other words, you're not recruiting teachers to come into this. It's all based on, I have a teacher that I want to hire for this position, and I need residency for that teacher.
No, we, you know, now we have, and we want, this is what I'm talking about building our recruiting. Just somebody emailed me yesterday and we did a Zoom session from San Diego and she wants to move to North Carolina. So they're investigating ways to do that. So, you know, I talked to her about residency and she wants to come to this area. So, we don't just go to our districts to say, who do you have? But we are, and I am constantly getting applications from really many different places now in the state.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Huh.
Others? All right, Dr. Cyber, you ready?
Thank you
I
so
am,
much.
sir. Good morning, Commission members. Just a quick update. In last week's board presentation, we presented the EPP performance report for the 2019-2020 school year. Those documents are now in the process of being added to the NCDPI website, so they ultimately will be publicly accessible. The data from that collection cycle of 2019 and 2020 is also being prepped for the EPP dashboard, the new online dashboard we just rolled out publicly this fall. So we expect that dashboard will be updated with the current year's data by February. And at the February board meeting, I'll go back to the board and update them on the completion of those of the dashboard and provide a couple of overall findings at the state level for the 2019-2020 school year regarding pipeline. In addition to that update to the board, there was also a one-off report that was required called the Monitoring of EPP Performance and Recommendations. And that report ultimately goes to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, otherwise known as the JLEOC. And it's basically to update them on the EPP reporting process and recommend any changes to the lawmakers to support the more efficient collection and preparation of the data that they're asking for. So as I said, this is a one-off report. It was cooked into 599 when that passed back in 2017, I think it was. And that's when they did a major overhaul of ed prep and licensure. And the thinking there was, you know, let's make a bunch of changes, then let the dust settle, and then check back in with a quick report to see how the data collection is going and see if we need to make any changes. So that report was due in December as well. So in short, just to sum up a couple of bullets from that report, DPI was able to collect all the materials that were required in law. There's really no issues in collecting that data. The EPPs are largely very responsive to data requests. Most of this data has been collected for a number of years across the state, and the annual process is fairly stable, so that a lot of the folks within the process of generating those reports know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. We have good communication across the EPP field. So in general, reporting collection is not really an issue. I did mention in that report that COVID did disrupt our ability to provide EVOS and NESIS data for EPPs in 2019 and 2020. And that constitutes 2 of the 3 accountability measures that are currently in place in law for that year. So we only have survey results to look at for 2019 and 2020. And then the last thing that was in that report was we made one recommendation to the JLEOC, and that was to move the deadline of the reporting for EPPs from December 15th out to April 15th of the following year. And that's because under normal non-COVID years, when the reporting system is normal, we can never really meet the December 15th deadline because we don't get teacher effectiveness data until late in fall. And so we get that data, process that data, put it into the reporting system, get it in front of the board formally gives it the green light. It takes us a couple of extra months in addition to the current deadline of December 15th. So we asked for an extension to be cooked into law. That was our one and only recommendation. And our hope is that they'll actually put it in. We actually ask for it every year, and we haven't gotten it. So without it, it just means that we would perpetually ask for an extension every year. So again, that was the only recommendation. And there really weren't any questions or concerns from the board on EPP reporting. That's a quick update on the EPP reporting to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Seiberg. Any questions? Hearing none, Dr. Tomberlin and Mrs. Stover.
I'm sorry, Patrick. I had, or Chairman Miller, I had switched it to the annual report on the state of the teaching profession.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Great. I will try to be brief because I am of the opinion that Mrs. Stover's presentation is much more edifying than mine. So I do want to take the opportunity to review the annual report on the state of the teaching profession for this year, for the 1920 school year. Please remember that this is in arrears because of the attrition data that comes in. We measure it from March of 19 to March of 20. And so one of the things we look at is look at the employment, attrition, and mobility trends across years. So here you see the last 3 years from 2017-18 to the 1920 school year. And you can see in terms of attrition, the state is extremely stable in how many teachers leave teaching in North Carolina public schools from year to year. And that number, especially in the last 2 years, is around 7,100 teachers, or 7.5% of the overall teaching force. And then the mobility is also a fairly stable measure for us, roughly about 40, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 4,500 teachers move from district to district across the state in any given year. This graph shows the percentage of teachers by years of experience who are no longer employed in North Carolina public schools. And as you can see, this is fairly consistent as well as we measure this. You see this kind of U-shaped curve. Higher attrition in the early years of the teaching profession. That starts to subside around year 6 or 7. And you get this kind of trough as teachers move through years 10 through about 25. Of course, at 25, or really around 20, teachers have the ability to retire with some benefit. And so you start seeing these attrition rates climb to their peak around year 30. And we do have teachers that, that do persist beyond that, but those attrition percentages are pretty high relative to the general population. We look at attrition by teacher categories as well. So if we look at our experienced licensed teachers, you can see on average they have a 6.7% attrition rate. And those, we define experienced licensed teachers as those with more than 3 years of experience and hold a license, of course. Then we break this down into beginning teachers. There's about 15,000, or around 15.5%, 16% of our teachers are beginning teachers across the state. They do show a little higher average attrition rate, about 11.7%. Then you have the Teach for America teachers and the VIF teachers. Those percentages are higher for attrition, but in those cases, you're dealing with kind of planned attrition. They are on time-limited contracts. Teach for America teachers certainly could stay beyond the contract, but many do not. And then VIF teachers, of course, there are laws against them remaining here on those J-1 visas past a certain number of years. So we would expect this kind of attrition, and it's probably not policy relevant. Lateral entry teachers, again, you've seen that fairly high attrition rate. They are actually a subset of the beginning teachers that is informative for us to look at. These are, largely folks who have gotten a bachelor's degree but did not go through a program, or career changers. That high attrition rate is worthy of examination, in that these teachers could feel that the profession was unexpected, that the challenges of the profession were unexpected, the requirements, or that they really weren't sure what they were getting into, or they're not feeling supportive. What are those reasons that those lateral entry teachers exhibit a much higher attrition rate than our traditionally prepared beginning teachers? We also look at the attrition by reason code. So by far, the greatest percentage of our teachers are expressing personal reasons for why they're leaving the profession. There is an appendix in this report that provides a breakdown of all those different reasons that you can look at. But some of these are policy relevant and some are not. One of the main ones is relocating out of state. And that is different than took a teaching position in another state. That is captured as well, I believe. But one of the things that we always struggle with the teaching profession is often it is the secondary income for a two-income family. And often the teacher, the primary breadwinner may get a job in another state, and the teacher has to follow. Those are not necessarily policy relevant, but there are some dissatisfaction with the teaching profession reported in there, and certainly things that could be examined and look for ways to diminish that attrition rate. You see the initiation by the LEA. The LEAs do play an important role for us in kind of helping counsel folks who are not a good fit for the teaching profession into other professions, or serving students in another role. And you can see that those there, we would consider this in large part good attrition. The LEAs are really helping us identify teachers who are not a good fit for the instruction, and moving them into other areas. Beyond the control of the LEA, retirement is the biggest driver here, and we can see that not necessarily policy relevant. And then the other reasons, these are reasons that may not feel like they fit. However, where we get notations on this, we do in the 1819 school year and the 1920, where those notes indicate close alignment with another category, we have started recoding those into the appropriate category. So you see that significant drop from 1718 to 1819. That's due in large part to our efforts to recode these things. When teachers say other reason, and the reason they express really does align better with another category, we go ahead and recode those. So by region, this is an important aspect of the report that we always highlight, and to see if there are differences by region in these attrition rates, or teachers leaving from certain regions at greater rates than others. And from this from this report, you can kind of visualize three distinct geographic areas of the state: the mountains, the Piedmont, and the coastal plain. And if you think about it that way, those regions that are in the coastal plain exhibit a higher than average attrition rate from their schools. And then as you move west, those attrition rates diminish as you move from east to west. And this is an important trend, and certainly not lost on the department, or was not lost on the Leandro Commission as they look at the issues affecting our schools in the eastern part of the state. The vacancy rates were not included in the report. This is at this time. Once the board has formally received the report, we have updated the report to include these vacancy rates by district. That will be in the formal version once the board officially receives the report, and we've prepared to submit it and we've submitted it to the JLEOC. We will post the official copy on our website, and those vacancy rates will be available for viewing. I can tell you that the 40-day vacancy rate across the state is about 1.8%, as reported by the LEAs, and that is pretty consistent with what we saw in the previous year. One of the, that vacancy by subject area, we also report out on the vacancy by subject areas. I can tell you, just from having completed this this chart, elementary education and EC in the elementary, middle, and high school level remain some of the top areas of vacancies for our LEAs across the state, and suggest some efforts on the part of our recruitment side of our board to help alleviate these vacancies across the state. We recommended to the board that the due date for this report be extended till April 15th. We were able to meet the current deadline of December 15th in large part because the lack of testing in the 1920 school year meant that we could not include the usual effectiveness data related to attrition and mobility across the state. So not having to wait for those data allowed us to meet the deadline, but we have reiterated to the State Board of Education the need for the extension of this report until April 15th. And that's a copy of the front page, and I will take any questions that any commission members might have.
Any questions for Dr. Tomberlin? Hearing none, Ms. Stover, you're up.
Right. Thanks, Kim. Could you bring up my slides? Thank you. Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to present at the Pepsi meeting this morning. My name is Maureen Stover, and as the 2020 Burroughs Wellcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year, a practicing high school teacher and a member of the Pepsi, it is my honor to talk to you today about my journey to becoming a fully licensed teacher in North Carolina. As we explore my path into teaching in North Carolina, you will learn that I had a few bumps in the road. However, as I speak with you today, I ask you to remember that we have 1.5 million students enrolled in North Carolina's public schools, and each of these kids deserves teachers who are trained and qualified to meet their diverse learning needs. The obstacles I encountered on my path to earning my North Carolina continuing educator's license helped ensure that I was a qualified teacher and provided an opportunity for my local school district and the Department of Public Instruction to certify that I could meet the diverse needs of the kids in my classroom and provide effective instruction. However, I do think it is important that we consider the obstacles I faced, because I know there are prospective teachers who have considered moving to North Carolina and decided not to because of the obstacles that they have faced during the licensure procedure. As a parent, a teacher, and a community member, I know that high-quality public education is paramount to our state's success. And today, I offer you my perspective on transferring my teaching certificate to North Carolina so we can identify some areas where we can improve and streamline our out-of-state teacher recruitment process. My dad describes me to his friends as his child who loves school. I think that's a perfect way to describe me. I love going to school and I love teaching school. Education is truly my calling. I show you my credentials not to brag, but rather to demonstrate the knowledge base that many teachers have earned. As teachers, we are required to earn continuing education credits to renew our certificates, but many teachers are motivated to engage in professional development beyond the minimum requirements to improve their teaching practice. When I moved to North Carolina from Florida, I was a fully licensed teacher in biology 6 through 12 and elementary education K through 6. And I had experience teaching at the high school and elementary school levels. In total, I have 8 years of classroom experience, 6 years in high school, 1 year in middle school, and 1 year in elementary school. And I have 6 years working as a licensed teacher in a consulting role that was directly related to education. I also have 2 master's degrees and 2 post-baccalaureate certificates in the education field. According to DPI, this is my experience. I am a bachelor's level teacher with 5 years of teaching experience. I did not receive credit for my out-of-state teaching, and my license was issued based on an undergraduate coursework. I am currently licensed to teach 6 through 12 for science and biology, and I no longer have the K-6 credential because my education prep program was in secondary science. When we moved to North Carolina, my Florida certificate was expiring, so I began the process to transfer my license here. I found the DPI website, followed the instructions to transfer my certificate, and mailed in my paperwork along with my check. 6 months later, when my check had not cleared and was about to expire, I called DPI to check on the progress. After several phone calls, I finally learned that my application had been sitting on someone's desk unopened for months. DPI did process my license, but when it arrived in the mail, I was surprised to learn that I was licensed as an initially licensed teacher. Because I was a military spouse and did not need health insurance, my school district in Florida had hired me as a teacher of record, but coded me as a long-term sub for pay purposes. I still made the same amount of money, but this saved the school district thousands of dollars in unnecessary health insurance costs. When my husband got orders to California, I accepted a position with the National Science Teaching Association and worked as a licensed teacher developing standards-aligned educational support materials. The licensure department explained that since I had been hired as a long-term sub in Florida, none of my out-of-state teaching experience would be credited. And while I was filling a licensed teacher position at NSTA, my time in this role did not count as teaching experience because I was not in a classroom. None of my postgraduate education is credited on my North Carolina license. I have submitted my transcripts, however, was told that my out-of-state degree from Adams State, which is an accredited university and a qualified teacher prep program in Colorado, was not qualified for credit in North Carolina. And the lady who I spoke with told me she didn't even know what Columbia University was, so she didn't think that would count either. Although WGU-NC is an approved EPP in North Carolina, my Master's of Arts in Teaching is not reflected on my license. Although this is something that I've been working with Dr. Tomberlin to rectify, and I do think that since that degree was conferred in the year 2020, that because of COVID-19 and the transition to remote working, that's probably where the hangup is on getting my license updated to a level M license. I was hired during the 2015-16 school year to fill an emergency vacancy in Cumberland County. I was not placed into the BT program, and I thought it was because I had completed 3 years of teaching in Florida. But when I was moved to a middle school for the 2016-17 school year, I was placed as a BT1. As an initially licensed teacher, I entered the BT program and started my journey to a continuing educator's North Carolina license. At times, it was tedious and it required an immense amount of paperwork. But these kids are why I am a teacher, and these kids are why I did not mind the extra work. My calling is to teach them. And if it meant a little extra work on my end to become a fully licensed teacher in North Carolina, it was totally worth it. However, my experience does raise some concerns about the transfer process in North Carolina. I was fortunate that my husband had a full-time job and we did not rely on my salary to meet our family's basic needs. This gave me time to work patiently for several months with DPI to finally get a certificate to teach in North Carolina. If my family had required my salary for our daily needs, I would not be a teacher in North Carolina today. Also, I understand that while I will not be compensated for my advanced degrees, I do think it is important that we put the postgraduate degrees are on a teacher's license and that they are acknowledged. If someone pulled my license right now, it would appear that I've only earned an undergrad degree. But with 2 postgraduate degrees and 2 postgraduate certificates, that is simply not the case. I think it would also be helpful to have clear information for out-of-state educators. The information on the right-hand side of the screen is from DPI's website. When I began the process to transfer my certificate, I read similar information. However, my Florida license was not transferred. My North Carolina license was issued based on my undergraduate degree, and North Carolina completely dropped my elementary license. While the process was cumbersome at times, when I started my license transfer process, I was not working in a North Carolina school. Once I was hired, it became much easier for me to work through the challenges because my principal, Maria Pierce Ford, and my superintendent, Dr. Marvin Conley, supported and guided me through the challenges with licensure. The BT program provided opportunities for me to reflect on my teaching practice and to learn from an outstanding retired educator, Dr. Carolyn Winfrey. It also provided me with an extensive understanding of the BT program, which enabled me to be a more effective mentor teacher and cooperating teacher. While I did run into some obstacles you can go to the next slide, please. While I did run into some obstacles earning my continuing educator's license in North Carolina, in the end, I would go back and do it all again in a heartbeat. I love teaching here. I love my students, my colleagues, and all of the amazing people I've met on my journey. While I do think there are some places where we can streamline the transfer process, in the end, North Carolina's system is designed to ensure our students have outstanding teachers, and I am proud to be a North Carolina educator. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today. If anyone has any questions or comments, I would be happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions?
This is Ann. I don't have any questions, but I have a comment. I appreciate you sharing this. As a matter of fact, about 2 years ago, I worked with a teacher from Florida that absolutely knew somebody, quote, randomly in my family that called me because she was so frustrated about trying to transfer her license. So I do think this is something that Pepsi needs to look at in terms of licensure requirements and validating that people may have received things from other states that we need to accept.
Yeah, and I also think just having really clear explanations on DPI's website, because that's where people are going to go first. If they're moving here and they're looking to transfer their license, they're going to go there. And yes, honestly, until we started this process and I began working with Dr. Tomberlin on this presentation, I thought the reciprocity meant that I was actually transferring my Florida license to North Carolina. Now I understand that it was my EPP experience and my undergraduate coursework that they were actually looking at to issue me a license. So the reciprocity is not the actual license, the reciprocity is with your education. And that's something that I did not understand until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then I also think that just having someone who maybe can help with some of those weird situations, especially with the large number of military spouses we have in North Carolina. We have a lot of people that are moving here from other states that have great experience and would love to be teachers. But if they're running into problems and they're only going to be here for 3 years, they're not going to waste 18 months trying to transfer their license, because then they're only going to be able to teach for 1.5 years before they PCS to their next duty station. And so I think trying to streamline that process and make it easier for teachers that are coming to North Carolina with experience to transfer their certificates would go a long way in helping us recruit high quality teachers from out of state.
I concur. Good job, Maureen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do too, and I'd like to say thanks to Maureen. But as a principal, I've seen multiple teachers who have had that same experience. And so anything that we can do to streamline that process would probably be very, very helpful. Thanks, Maureen.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I also feel though there still needs to be some check, right? Because I was able to come in and begin teaching right away, and many teachers can do that. But I think, you know, our kids and their education is so important. There has to be some way to validate that that teacher who's coming into you, who's already licensed in another state, is an effective educator. And that's part of the reason why I say that I would go back and go through this process again if I needed to, because in the end, the process ensured that I was an effective instructor, and the process ensured that I was able to meet the diverse learning needs of every kid in my classroom. If they had just issued me the full license, there wouldn't have really been those checks other than the normal evaluation and observation process. So I do think it's important that we do have some way to validate that teachers coming in from out of state are actually effective instructors, and are ready to take on the educational needs of all of our kids.
Maureen, this is Connie. Thank you again for sharing your story. There's two comments that you brought, or two statements that you brought out. Number one, your paperwork was sitting on someone's desk for over 6 months. That's a common theme that I hear around here. Another one that you brought out I thought was so powerful is that if you had not had the support of your husband, that you would not have been able to continue with the process. And I think that's an issue that we run in our county too, because of the time frame that's associated with completing that process. Many people just give up. So thank you for those comments, and it just adds validity to a lot of the comments that I hear in my community.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Stover. Dr. Tomlin will now present a policy amendment to LICN-001 for discussion and action.
Sorry, Chairman Miller, he is another part of the presentation.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
So, thank you. I have so I want to first echo Maureen's sentiment that I have learned so much about the licensure process. She's learned about the process from the state side, but it's been really eye-opening for me to hear about the experience from the end user side. And that's great. It is a little daunting to follow that presentation because I'm just speaking to what the policies are. I'm not addressing Maureen's particular situation, but I think by reviewing the policies with you all, you will begin to see why these things happen the way they happen. And so let me just start with a brief kind of overview. Next, yes. So, and set the context. So in the 1920 school year, there were approximately 7,100 new teachers employed in North Carolina. Of these, about a quarter came from out of state. So for the current year, there are about 4,700 new teachers hired, and 26.8%, again, a little over a quarter, are coming from another state. The out-of-state pipeline is a critical piece of our overall human capital pipeline in the state of North Carolina. We could not meet the needs of our schools without this out-of-state pipeline. So it's critically important to ensuring that these folks are able to get in to the system with as little obstacles as possible. With that said, however, there are policies that guide our ability. Oh, I'm sorry, you're fine. The next slide is fine. There are policies that guide our process. And I'm sure you all remember these charts from our early days in PEPC, where we basically divide the route of an out-of-state teacher into North Carolina into two major groups. And that is, the first is teachers with fewer than 3 years of experience. And so these teachers coming in are held to requirements. It is absolutely correct what was said before, that we do not have license reciprocity with any state. We have preparation reciprocity. So we recognize the preparation program from the state if that program leads to licensure in that state. So we review their transcripts and their in their documents the same as we would for an in-state teacher. We don't just say they have a license and let's move them through. We put them through the same review process as any other teacher. Teachers with fewer than 3 years of experience must have a test. If they don't have a test, they would be held to that requirement, and it has to be a comparable test, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Elementary and ECGC are a specific subgroup of these out-of-state teachers. They must take the North Carolina exam, the Pearson and the Praxis exams related to elementary education, as well as the Praxis related to ECGC if they're going that route. For teachers with greater than 3 years of experience, there's a little more leniency. These teachers, if they're coming to us from out of state with greater than 3 years of experience, we'll accept comparable tests. We will use National Board as a waiver from the licensure exam if they hold a National Board. But in all cases, an out-of-state teacher, in order to be issued a CPL, has to submit effectiveness data. That is a statutory requirement. So if they don't, if a 30-year teacher comes to us, a 30-year veteran comes to us and doesn't bring effectiveness data, then they must be issued an IPL and not a CPL. That doesn't mean they have testing requirements necessarily or any requirements. It just means that they're a tier 1 license. And we have gotten feedback from teachers from out of state that even that perception is off-putting to them, that they're basically relegated to an initial licensed teacher when they come to North Carolina, regardless of their experience. For elementary and ECGC, we will take comparable tests, but there has to be, as many of you know, there has to be a clear passing subtest of math and reading. This does present a huge challenge for states that do not have those required subtests in their licensure process. They could have passed another state's elementary education exam, a licensure exam, but if the testing system doesn't report out a subtest of math and reading, then we cannot accept it. So here's some 6 major considerations that we look at for out-of-state teachers, and let's just go ahead and launch into those. First, the Educator Preparation Program. Other states' EPPs are recognized as providing adequate preparation. That's how North Carolina views reciprocity. We will accept an out-of-state preparation for a candidate if that preparation led to licensure in the state of origin. Out-of-state licensure exams are recognized with North Carolina with some exceptions. And those notable exceptions are elementary and ECGC. I do want to go back to that real quickly. We do stipulate, there is a little wrinkle in this. If the out-of-state applicant has a test that is the same test as North Carolina, so if someone's coming to us from Maryland and they use Praxis 100, I'm just making that up, as the basis of the licensure exam, and Maryland uses that and North Carolina uses that, if Maryland's cut score was lower than North Carolina's cut score, we would hold the applicant to the North Carolina cut score. And if they didn't meet the North Carolina cut score, then we would require testing from that individual. If the test is different but comparable, then we'll take whatever the passing score is from the external state. Out-of-state licenses, we accept other states' licenses as the basis for issuing the North Carolina license, but as I said earlier, that's all subject to review, just like we would an in-state person. There's transcript review, years of experience, verification, all that underlying work is the same for an out-of-state as it is for an in-state teacher. Candidate must have effectiveness data to be granted in a CPL. North Carolina testing, they will be held to North Carolina testing if the candidate does not have a comparable test, and greater than 3 years of teaching in another state can trigger, is a critical trigger for the BPSP program. We will combine years of experience across multiple states. but that has to be certified teaching experience to waive the BTS requirement. So not all IPLs issued for out-of-state teachers come with a BTS requirement. It's done on a case-by-case basis. I will say this does present a bit of a challenge for us on the high end and the low end of the scale. Our out-of-state teachers get hit from two directions here, and I want to make sure that the commission members understand this. On the high end of the scale, teachers with, let's say, 20 plus years of experience, often there may have not been a licensure test as a basis for issuing the license in the other state, and so those teachers, those very experienced teachers, are coming to us without a test or the specific requirement for elementary and ECGC that those subtests are present. It disproportionately affects our more experienced teachers coming from out of state. They often don't have to meet those requirements. We offer things like they can take the test, but we also offer foundations of reading and mathematics courses to meet that requirement, but it is very off-putting for those experienced teachers to be subjected to a licensure test in that late time of their career. On the front end, we often get teachers coming to us from out of state with fewer than 3 years of experience who went ahead and did a master's. And what they experienced is they did that with the full expectation that maybe in their home state or that master's would be recognized. But because they're early career teachers coming into the system, they often don't meet the 2013, August 1st, 2013 deadline for starting that master's. And so they experience quite a bit of sticker shock when they realize that they would only qualify for the bachelor's level and a significant decrease in pay for coming to North Carolina. The level of licensure, of course, the CPL requires that effectiveness data and experienced teachers with greater than 3 years of experience are not required to complete BTSP. And the requirements to convert to a CPL, the beginning teacher support, the licensure exams, we will, including the EdTPA and PPAT, for those teachers that are coming to us. This is going to start becoming an issue for out-of-state teachers in states that have not adopted EdTPA or PPAT. That was not on their radar, and they'll find when they come to North Carolina that if they graduated after September 1st, 2019, they will be held to the EdTPA or PPAT requirements. National boards is accepted in lieu of licensure exams, except for elementary and ECGC, where the teacher has greater than 3 years experience. And the bachelor's or license, out-of-state teachers can be issued an A, M, or D level license. Of course, this is separate and apart from salary. The license can be issued at those levels, but the salary differential has a very specific trigger. That is, the program had to be begun on or before August 1st, 2013. Graduate degrees must align with the license area for the license to be designated an M or a D. But this is a switch, a very recent switch to our position with master's degrees due to the fact that many teachers were getting an MSA degree and using that as the basis for master's pay. That changed back in 2013. In order for the M or the D level licensure to be issued, the graduate program has to be relevant to the base teaching license. Again, I already mentioned that the license level does not necessarily indicate a differential in salary. And then finally, years of experience salary. Certified teaching experience is verified by the employer and credited on a one-to-one basis for salary position. Partial years may be combined for experience credit. So if you've got partial years across states, this is particularly important for our military personnel. We will combine those across jurisdictions as much as we're able given the verification. Graduate work has to be commenced on or before August 1st to qualify for advanced pay. And non-teaching work experience prior to a BA degree may be awarded on the 2-for-1 basis if it's relevant to the license area. if the work experience, the non-teaching work experience was acquired after a BA and it is relevant to the licensure area, we will award a 1-to-1 years of experience on the license. This experience, however, is non-transferable across license areas. So in other words, if I got a science and a CTE license, and in my CTE, I got CTE credit for years of non-teaching years of experience applied to that license, that level of experience does not commute over to the science license because the work experience is not relevant. And so that presents a challenge for teachers sometimes, even though we might award credit on one license area, it doesn't necessarily mean that the teacher would be paid differently for work in the other license area. So one of the issues that we grapple with in our side is this the way we interpret policy or we apply the policy. Most of out-of-state teachers' frustration is related to our adherence to policy and not exercising judgment in unusual cases. So the best analogy I can come up here is monetary policy. There's two schools of thought here. You have discretionary monetary policy and rule-based monetary policy. Under discretionary monetary policy, you would look at the economic conditions of the country in order to make your monetary policy. That is in opposition to a rule-based policy where you have a set of rules, and those rules are followed regardless of the context. And that would dictate certain actions based on a predetermined set of rules. And that's how we operate in the licensure office. The rules are there. We look at the rules, we look at the case, does it meet the conditions of the rules, and we make a determination based on that. We do not have the authority or the ability to consider the particular context that the candidate is bringing or the particular story that the candidate has in order to make the determination. So the pros and cons of this are consistency and uniform application versus situational application of the policy. There are pros and cons of this. Of course, the latter is much more for customer service and individually and respectful of the individual, but it can lead to different decisions made by different folks based on the context. The former may seem cold and unfeeling, but it does produce consistent and uniform results in the application of the policy. The example that I gave the board when I did this was if the late Stephen Hawking decided he wanted to teach high school physics, we in the department could not consider the fact that this is the greatest mind in physics that the world has probably ever known. We would have to hold him to a residency model in order for him to be able to teach in North Carolina public schools. We cannot consider his context. We can only consider the documentation that he would be bringing to the process. And I'm assuming that Stephen Hawking did not go through an EdTech program. So the takeaways from this: out-of-state teachers are a critical component of the teacher pipeline. Removing policy obstacles to North Carolina license could help keep this pathway robust. Ease of obtaining licensure versus ensuring consistent standards for all licensees. We have, even though it is a big component of our pipeline, the 25. If we make the pathway for out-of-state teachers demonstrably easier for those candidates than we do our North Carolina candidates, then we risk alienating the 75% of the in-state folks that make up our excuse me, human capital pipeline. All licensed teachers, but the department does need to recognize that all licensed teachers have the potential to become a teacher of the year, and they should be treated as such, and the process should be consistently frustration-free for those individuals. Matt, not relevant. Sorry, we repurposed a different presentation for this. But I am happy to take any questions or comments you might have about the process.
Any questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Tomlin. You ready to move into the policy amendment?
Sure.
Thanks.
I'm sharing the policy amendment now.
We all get to see Kim's password. So. I think you went past the first one, Jen.
Those are for audiology. We presented on those last time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So this, here you see this, this edit to the LIC in 001. The change here is the additional residency license areas may be cleared in accordance with policy LIC in 005 section 2. That reference had absolutely nothing to do with clearing residency license areas. And so we've made the change that the requirements found in this section of LIC in 001, which is where those additional requirements are found. We tried very hard to get this recognized as a technical correction to the policy that didn't require your approval and recommendation to the State Board of Education, but others did not see it that way. And so this is the extent of this policy change, is we're correcting the reference so it does refer the reader back to the appropriate section of the policy. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Tomlin on this? Hearing no questions, do I have a motion to approve this policy amendment to LICN 001 so we can send it to the State Board in January?
So moved. This is Van.
Thanks, Van. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Have a motion and a second to approve this policy amendment. While we're preparing to vote, I would like to add that this amendment is in addition to the policy amendments that we discussed and approved last month. All of these amendments will be sent to the State Board in January, so just keep that in mind. So, any further discussion on today's amendment? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Are there any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Dr. Seiberg, you are now up for an update on the foundations of reading assessment.
Yeah, and this one will be short. The foundations of reading assessment, there's been some updates to the foundations of reading. The vendor has reached out to me to acknowledge that, and so we've sent that information over to the folks in CNI to review that. and ultimately they'll have to come up with a a recommendation that will need to come through you all, and then ultimately to the board for consideration. But the update is not, it's not necessarily because there was anything wrong with the existing test. It's like a update to modernize the test and keep it current with current thinking, current science and technology, and technology, and et cetera. So I just wanted to alert everyone that has come to North Carolina, and we'll be working on preparing that for you all going forward.
Any questions for Dr. Seiberg? All right, thank you, Dr. Seiberg. Next, Dr. Ann Bullock will provide committee updates for student teaching and the residency license committees. Dr. Bullock.
Okay, I'm turning on my camera just because I think it's weird to present without it on. All right, good morning, everyone. The student teaching subcommittee met, and we had decided that after Thanksgiving, we would send out another survey to confirm that there were no fall student teachers that would be graduating in December that would not be eligible for licensure. In other words, were there any candidates in North Carolina that would not have 16 weeks of student teaching, AKA internship, that is required in our policy, and therefore be ineligible for licensure due to the pandemic, and et cetera, et cetera. So we had 41 responses out of the 55 approximately 55 EPPs. And we had one response where they listed that they had some students that would not be graduating due to not having 16 weeks of student teaching. But the response was unclear, so I followed up with the EPP and found that it was not related to the 16 weeks. So at this point, Pepsi does not know of, the subcommittee for student teaching as part of Pepsi does not know of any EPP that has candidates that are being impacted with licensure due to pandemic reasons for the fall. So that's good. Any questions on that one? Okay, so my second report is about an ad hoc committee that I requested from our last Pepsi meeting related to the areas of licensure for residency licensed candidates. So if you all remember, Dr. Tomberlin brought forth a concern that there was someone looking for dance education a few meetings ago, and was there a possibility for this person to affiliate with an EPP from North Carolina to online because they were in a different part of the state. So we created an ad hoc committee which had Pepsi and non-Pepsi EPP membership on it. And we sent out a survey via Andrew related to asking if they offered residency programs where candidates would not have to travel, in other words, through virtual learning, to meet their coursework. So we had 39 responses. We asked about 30 areas of licensure that were considered specialized or not as many programs across the state. The majority of these were in language, Arabic, Chinese, Greek, modern, Greek. It just continues. Out of the 30 areas of licensure, there were 26 of the 30 areas, there's at least one EPP, and most of the time two, that offer an online or a virtual learning program for candidates, no matter their location in North Carolina. There were two that we included on the list, Bible and Speech Communication K-12, that no one said they offer a licensure program in. Speech communication is, quote, an old license, unquote, and I don't believe many school districts do that. And Bibles is typically someone that either has a social studies license or that it's a locally funded licensure area. And anyone in the LEA can refute that if they need to. There were 2 other licensure areas that we did not find anyone offered an online program for. So we're going to follow up and see if that is a need. That was for hearing impaired and visually impaired licensure areas, which are 2 extremely specialized areas where people would have to have a specific background to be able to be those teachers. Any questions on that?
Any questions for Dr. Bullock? Thank you for those updates and for leading that work, Dr. Bullock. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick.
Sure. Now, Dr. Van Dempsey will provide an update on the work of the DRIVE Task Force. So, Dr. Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to get my video to come up. And good morning, everybody. I do want to point out, before I share some comments about the DRIVE Task Force, there was some overlap between DRIVE and Pepsi. Dr. Anthony Graham, who chaired the DRIVE Task Force, Dr. Evans, and myself are part of both of those groups, and there may be other people in case I forgot. Feel free to give a shout out. What I'm going to do is share a few notes about the DRIVE Task Force report, in particular relative to Praxis Core, and share some information about how we framed that particular issue within the task force. And then at the end, I would like to offer a motion for Pepsi to consider, and certainly answer questions and discussion. The purpose of the task force, I think everybody understands, is to develop a representative workforce that mirrors diversity in the teaching profession as related to North Carolina school students. Dr. Anthony Graham in the report has an opening message to Governor Cooper where he challenges the state of North Carolina to challenge the structural racism inherent in the public education system in North Carolina, including the structures, policies, procedures, and systems through which people become teachers, and to think differently about existing policies, accountability structures, standards, and EPP practices relative to diversity. I want to point out a few recommendations that are in, or strategies that are mentioned in the report, and these notes, provided these to Dr. Evans, so she'll have page references if you're interested. But general recommendation on page 2 to expand where possible the entry points into the profession, particularly for people of color. In the performance indicators on page 3, performance indicator number 1, increase educators of color admitted to EPP pathways to the profession. In the section on page 9, in the imperative, why having a diverse educator workforce matters, a point that's made pretty clearly in the document, and we talked about it in virtually every meeting during the process since last spring. Clearly, there is a benefit to children of color if they have a more diverse educator profession and they see people who look like them when they're in their schools and classrooms. The research on that is clear. There is also a parallel benefit for white students who are in schools who have a more diverse population of educators, in particular teachers. And so the benefit impacts all students, but in particular students of color. Key sections and references in the report that relate to Praxis Core. In the section, the challenge on pages 10 and 11, the challenge, barriers to creating and sustaining a diverse educator workforce. And in this challenge section, there are several items that relate specifically to the restrictions, problems, suppression of the ability to enter the EPPs because of Praxis Core. And they relate to the use of the certification exam. Number 1, the cultural bias that is embedded in the test. Number 2, the unequal access candidates have to the foundational knowledge to be successful on the test. Number 3, the cost of taking the test. Number 4, the lack or absence of an identified correlation between Praxis Core and teacher education candidates' success and practitioner impact. The DRIVE found no data and this is generally known knowledge about praxis in EPPs, core does not predict and does not correlate to educator candidate preparation candidate success or success as a practitioner in terms of impact on children. There are disparities in terms of the exclusionary and restrictive impact for potential educators of color. The pass rates for potential educators of color are much lower than they are for the general population and for white candidates who take the test. And there are also disparities in the application of the test given different routes to certification. So if you are pursuing certification through a traditional undergraduate route to certification, Praxis Core is a requirement for entry into the EPP's program. If a person has a bachelor's degree and is pursuing any route to certification that is a post-baccalaureate route, including licensure only, master's degrees, whatever that might be, the test is not required. So it is uniquely prohibitive in undergraduate programs where the person does not have a bachelor's degree yet, and it isn't a factor at all if a person has completed a bachelor's degree. And then on top of those issues related to the exam itself in terms of the construction of the exam, students take on a financial burden and in some cases debt to take the exam. In the first place, if you do one of the 3 test sections, it's $90 per test taken, and that's each time if you have to retest. If you take it as a bundle, you take all 3, you can pay $150. But then every time a student has to retake Praxis Core, the student has to pay in addition to that. I just checked with one of our folks here at UNCW this morning in advance of the meeting. We have a student right now, for example, who wants to be in our teacher education program, can't pass part of Praxis Core, has already expended $600 in order to pass the test that, by the way, has no correlative value to EPPs or practice. In the strategy section on page 16, number 8, it calls for developing robust asset-based candidate selection and eliminate the use of a single measure such as Praxis Core. So what we want to do is understand the strengths the applicant is bringing to the pre-preparation process and ultimately the profession. And then strategy number 11, adjust licensure exam requirements to use multiple performance measures in lieu of a single licensure exam, again, due to the lack of correlation. So I'll pause there and sort of wrap that up by saying one of the part of the impetus of the DRIVE task force, the report itself, conversations that I've had with Dr. Graham, is we believe we should move as expeditiously as possible to pursue the elimination of Praxis Core as a test required for EPPs and used in the state of North Carolina. And I'll pause for questions, and Dr. Evans may have some comments to make as well. She was also on the task force, and then would like to make a motion if the commission would entertain it.
Any questions for Dr. Dempsey? So Kim, can you talk about what Dr. Dempsey has put a motion on the floor to, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Dempsey, for Pepsi to take up the task of considering the elimination of Praxis Core. Is that what I heard?
Correct. Well, I'm assuming we would make a recommendation that ultimately would have to be considered by the General Assembly because it's in legislation, but that is correct in terms of the motion.
Okay, so Dr. Evans and Dr. Seiberg and Tomberlin, we would need, is that something we can vote on today, or is that something that needs some further work to get that out and get that recommendation headed to where it needs to be?
Mr. Chairman, just one point. I think I might have misunderstood your point. Actually, the motion I'd like to make is that we create a work group to look at the impact of Praxis Core, ultimately with a recommendation to eliminate it. So the step of a work group is what I'm actually willing to propose.
That clarified that. Thank you for that clarification.
Chairman Miller, this is Kim. I don't believe we need a motion to do that. That's something that we can go ahead and decide that
Correct.
that Pepsi wants to do, just like any other committee or subcommittee work.
Yep, and for the record, I am very much in agreement with Dr. Dempsey's recommendation. Hope the rest of the commission is, and we'll get to work on getting that subcommittee up and running. Are there any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew. I just wanted to add to the conversation here. At the point at which the subcommittee has something that is formulated as a formal recommendation, Tom and I will work, and Kim, the three of us will work behind the scenes to figure out procedurally how to proceed. Would that go to the board first, or would it go to the JLEOC, and what the technical procedures are between now and when that gets built? So just wanted to give you some clarity there that we don't yet have the technical procedures put together for that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this is Randy from UNCG.
Sure.
I'd just like to let whoever's going to organize this know I'd be very interested in serving on that work group.
Noted. Thank you so much.
As will I, Patrick.
And Dr. Bullock has volunteered as well in the comments, so thank you for that. We will certainly take you up on it, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I would remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held on Thursday, January 14th, beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
And before we do have a second, before we go to vote on adjournment, just like to say happy holidays to everyone, and thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of Professional Educator Prep and Standards Commission. Those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Hey, Van,
Yeah.
will you send me that? Can you send me the drive report? Do we
Yeah,
have
it's
it
in the,
Is it the agenda?
I can send it to everyone on Pepsi.
Very good.
Great, thank you.
thank you.
Bye.